All right, good morning. Or I guess it's afternoon actually. It just turned noon. Thank you so much for those of you who are joining us. We're really excited to be having this conversation today. My name is Nina Idamudia, and I am the CEO of the Center for Neighborhood Technology. We are, for those of you who don't know, we are a 40, sorry, how old are we? 45, 46-year-old think and do tank here in Chicagoland. And we work at the intersection of the built environment and equity. And one of the things that we love to do over at CNT is talk about how we can create more equitable systems, long-term system change. And so we're excited for you to be joining us today during this webinar so that we can unveil the tool that we've kind of been working on with our partners. As you all know, the need for drinking water infrastructure upgrades throughout the country is huge. But the funding to help the communities in needs is often not there or too little. And what we want to be able to do by using this tool, this new SRF DAC tool, mapping tool, is to help advocates and policymakers target funding to communities that really need it most, right? When we think about what does it mean to equitably distribute resources, well, that's not an answer that's just going to come out of thin air. It takes a lot of thought leaders, a lot of community members to come together to create these solutions. And so we're excited that you're here with us today. We want to make a special thank you to the Joyce Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, and the Water Foundation for supporting this work, which is a result of a year of research, coding, and other work by us at the Center of Neighborhood Technology and Environmental Policy Innovation Center, or EPIC. We're going to hear from EPIC and CNT staff about the tool, comments from the advisory board members, and we're going to have time for Q&A later. So please do drop your questions in the chat. I want to remind everybody that we are indeed recording, so this will be available for everyone after the fact, and then we will also be sure to send out materials to those who are on the list. And so we can go ahead and transition to the next slide. All right, so you've already heard from me. Our other two presenters today are Janet from EPIC and Paul from CNT. And so you'll hear us kind of talk about the tool, and then we'll go back to our panelists. Go to the next slide. Oh, okay. Oh, one slide too much. Here we go. Okay. I'm trying to find the right slide, but it keeps moving. But what I'll do is just keep going. Our panelists that are here today, we want to recognize the advisory committee who met 5 times with our researchers and tool creators to provide feedback, and who are really the folks who helped us understand how this tool would be most useful to people, right? We're not just making a tool in a vacuum. We're not just putting data sets together to say that we did it. We're creating this tool to actually help community members, advocates, practitioners understand the problem, but also understand the solutions to get us to a closer, more equitable water infrastructure funding. So we have both Becky and Joe who are going to be joining us and telling their story about how they interacted with this process and also how their organizations plan on using this tool. Next slide. So I will pass it off to Janet to give us a little explanation of what to expect during this webinar.
Thanks, Nina. Good to be with you all. Thanks for joining the webinar. I want to give a little bit of a background and introduction to EPIC and to this DAC mapping tool. So EPIC has been involved in looking at water infrastructure financing, and particularly at the state revolving funds, SRFs, over the last couple of years, and built some learning in this area, as a lot of other organizations and interested parties have also taken a heightened interest in these state revolving funds, which have existed for decades, but with the influx of money that came in to the fund in recent years through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, together with increased additional subsidies in the form of grants or principal forgiveness available for those funds, has really increased interest in the SRFs and in the state policies around them. So I wanted to start out by just giving a little bit broader context around what's happening with SRFs at this time. Why is there a heightened interest? And how do sort of our consideration around DAC definitions, or how states are defining disadvantaged communities for the distribution of these funds, what's the wider context in which that is situated? And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the different features of DAC definitions that we should be, that folks are concerned about. And then finally, talk a little bit about how to use the tool to explore these DAC definitions. So first of all, in relation to this wider context, as I mentioned, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act brought an influx of funds into this space. These funds are going to be, they were appropriated by the federal government in the federal budget years of 2022 through 2026. But they're actually being implemented at the state level over the years 2023 through 2028. So really, we're about in the middle of the state implementation of rolling out these funds. So it's a really good time to both learn from what we've seen and experienced in terms of how these funds are rolling out so far, how states have modified or adapted their policies to take into consideration these funds and some new concerns around them, or to what extent are they not adapting and still need to. So it's a really important point in time for bringing forward our learning and engaging in further advocacy and attention to these issues. This tool focuses on one particular state policy, which is how states define disadvantaged communities. This classification of disadvantaged communities is important because a number of other policies, including how principal forgiveness or grants or other kinds of additional subsidies that don't have to be paid back by states, are distributed to communities. Just by way of background, it's important to remember that the state revolving funds are primarily a loan program. So most of the assistance that's provided through the SRFs goes out to communities in the form of loans that are below market rates. Some of the funds are also distributed as principal forgiveness or grants. This is money that doesn't have to be repaid by the receiving community. And these additional subsidies are to be targeted, according to federal law, towards disadvantaged communities. But it's the states that define who qualifies as a disadvantaged community. Now, it's also important to remember that how DACs are defined is not the only policy that directs sort of where these additional subsidies go. It's also very important to take into consideration how projects are ranked and prioritized, caps or other constraints that states put on principal forgiveness, how much money the state chooses to allocate for principal forgiveness from some of its discretionary funds. And also other tools in addition to principal forgiveness and grants, like interest rate discounts or additional technical assistance or planning grants that can be provided to disadvantaged communities. So I want to just point out that in addition to the actual tool that we're going to explore today, EPIC has prepared a report articulating both some policy considerations around DAC definitions and also some of these other policies that are relevant as well, for you to sort of understand better the full context in which we're looking at these issues. And another thing I want to point out about the context is, some of you may be aware that, there's amongst the uncertainty that exists at the federal level around a lot of funding and environmental policies right now. There's some degree of uncertainty around SRFs and the funding coming into SRFs. While we feel that the money that's come from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is fairly secure and is flowing to states and to communities, there's some uncertainty as considerations given to the 2026 federal budget as to what will, what will the level of funds for SRFs be going forward. I don't want to cause too much panic around that, because I think there's also a lot of support in Congress for this program. But the point I want to make here is that even in the midst of some degree of uncertainty around this issue, the SRFs are going to continue at the state level, even, regardless of, even if federal funding at the federal level is dramatically decreased, right? So even in that situation, these SRF programs have existed and have basically accumulated hundreds of millions of dollars in their corpus of revolving funds in each state. And the states are going to continue to operate those programs over upcoming years, even regardless of good or bad things that might happen at the federal level in relation to these programs. And so I just want to emphasize that, to underscore that what we're talking about here are state policies that determine where this money goes, not federal policies. And so attention to those state policies is going to continue to be very important, and perhaps even more important, given the uncertainty we might feel at what's happening at the federal level around some of these questions. Okay. So moving on to talk more specifically about DAC definition policies themselves. Some of the things to take into consideration are, what factors do states use when they're defining DACs? Traditionally, states have looked at factors like population, median household income, and the water rate burden. The water rate burden is typically a calculation looking at the median household income for a water service area, and then comparing that to the average water rates for a certain amount of water supply in that system. And then a water rate burden is calculated based on how much of the average median household income does an average household have to use to pay for that average demand for water. So those are some of the traditional factors that have been part of DAC definitions in recent decades. But with this increased interest on SRFs that has been brought by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, new indicators looking at poverty factors, environmental justice area definitions, and social vulnerability factors have started to come into play in some states, including in the Great Lakes states that are the subject of this mapping tool. So in addition to looking at what factors are used, it's important to consider what thresholds and what weights are accorded to those factors. These are some of the things that we'll be able to explore with the tool. It's also important to consider whether the data used in a DAC definition is publicly available, so that communities can sort of self-assess what they might expect in terms of whether they qualify as a DAC, and accordingly, what kind of assistance they might be able to get from the SRF. States also structure their definitions in different ways. Some will say, well, have 5 factors, and as long as you meet just 2 of those factors, you're good. Others will say you have to meet all 5. Some have scaled definitions where they'll give different degrees of points for different factors, and then have a cumulative score. And if you meet a certain minimum score, you can qualify as a DAC. So there's a little different structures, and we see those different kind of structures demonstrated by the 7 states that are mapped with this tool. Another thing to think about is, what is the geographic scope against which the DAC factors are assessed? The tool, and most often, DAC factors are assessed against the whole service area for the water system, and that's how this tool maps DACs. But sometimes states also allow for DAC factors to be assessed based on the project scope. So a narrower, smaller area within a water service area that's going to benefit from a particular project and benefit a particular neighborhood. Where that's the geographic scope, that's been more difficult for this tool to map, but it's something to keep in mind that sometimes that's what the state is allowing for. And then sometimes states will use different DAC definitions for different types of projects. For example, many states will have a different definition for DACs when it comes to their lead service line projects than they have for their general water infrastructure projects. The tool defaults to mapping the general definition for water infrastructure projects. but sometimes there's still ways that you can explore the definition related to lead service line projects using the tool. It depends on how the state defines it. And again, I refer to the report that will accompany the tool that provides a lot more detail around these kinds of questions for each state. Okay, so moving on just to briefly talk about how to use the tool. Some of the things to think about when you're using the tool is, do the definitions seem to be too broad or too narrow in terms of the volume or scope or type of communities that appear to be targeted when you map those communities out using the tool? As Paul will explain, there's ways the tool allow you to change and play with the thresholds or different factors to see how you might vary or shift the definition and the capture area of DACs for your state. And I just want to highlight also some of the limitations related to the tool. I want to point out that generally, like other tools of this sort, of course, we have to rely on some modeling to actually create a tool like this. The service area boundaries for the water systems are modeled, and so too is the way we align census tract data or other key data sources that are relevant to DAC definitions to these geographic areas. And so, of course, using modeling, there's going to be some degree of imprecision, right? So the tool we think is extremely valuable because it allows you to picture and understand which communities are captured by a state's DAC definition. But I just need to caution that there may be some, it may not always be precise. For certain communities, it might identify it as a DAC, and maybe in reality it's not, if it weren't modeled and you actually could apply all the data more precisely. So I just want to throw that out there as a caveat, and that when you're talking about a specific community, it's always good to sort of verify more directly with the real data to determine if it's a DAC. But the tool, I think you'll find, will be very useful in kind of exploring the general catchment and scope of these definitions. Okay. So now on to Paul for what you're really all waiting for, is to actually see the tool and how we can use it and what we can learn from it.
Thank you, Janet. Let me share my screen. Okay. Are we all seeing my screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for joining today. My name is Paul Essling. I work at the Center for Neighborhood Technology in the Urban Analytics Group, and I work on mapping tools like this one. I helped develop this this tool with my colleague John Kuda, of course with a lot of great input from EPIC and those on the advisory committee. So what you're seeing here is the landing page for the tool with just a brief intro so that users who understand what they're looking at here can just dive right in and get to the data. But there's also a link to about this tool if you want to, if you need more information to begin with. But and you can also search the map here or skip to the map. I'm going to start by going to Illinois. And this is what you see when you select a state. Now, once you're in the tool, we're looking at one state at a time because each state has their own definitions. So I'm just starting here with Illinois, and I just need to minimize something so I could see the screen better. Yeah, so the Illinois snapshot reads the state of Illinois has 1,635 community water systems. Of those, 1,066 qualify as state-defined disadvantaged communities, or DACs, based on the criteria that Illinois uses for their DAC definition. So each state will have that those sentences there with the numbers respectively for their state. There's a link below this for an introduction. You can get some more information by clicking on that. I'm just going to collapse that, and this donut chart here will show you the percent of community water systems that could qualify as DACs. And we're at 65% in Illinois versus 35% non-DACs. We can also toggle this to population and see that of the population in Illinois, only 18% of the population live in those DAC qualified, or those community water systems that would qualify as DACs. And 71% are in water systems that do not qualify as DACs. Another 10% of the population do not live in public water systems at all, so they may have well service or something like that. So this is the white area on the map, not in a community water system. So looking at the map, the DACs are in blue. The gray areas are community water systems that are not qualified, that do not qualify as DACs, and then again the white areas, those the areas that are not part of a community water system. So as we scroll down, see there's these different sections. The Illinois DAC definition, you can expand that and see the definition. So in Illinois, the first criteria is population must be less than 25,000, and one of the three criteria here also need to be met. So either a median household income less than the state median household income of 78,433, or unemployment rate is greater than the state unemployment rate of 6%, or the average water rate is greater than 1% of the median household income. Now you can click on the question mark here and get some more detailed information on the Illinois DAC definition. And throughout this tool, you'll see links to the report that Janet mentioned that is available with this tool. I also wanted to point out that there are other links in here that will bring up our glossary of terms, which is handy if some of these terms are not familiar. So below the DAC definition is the DAC analysis, and I'm going to skip that for now and come back to it. Below that is demographics. And here we have a set of demographics that that we put together, with our advisory group on some information that would be useful to have in alongside the DAC definitions. So we have age cohorts, at households without access to a vehicle, educational attainment, And for all of these charts, you'll see the colors correspond to the map. So the the blue bar, the blue portion of the bar is those in who live in a DAC. The gray portion is those who live in a community water system that's not a DAC, and then the white portion is the remaining, those who don't live in a community water system. And these charts are interactive too, so you could turn on and off different portions. We have unemployment, households without health insurance, tenure, renters and owners, the veteran population, poverty, both the population living below the poverty threshold and below 200% poverty threshold, which is often used for different programs, including some of these DAC definitions. Race, ethnicity, and means of transportation to work. So below that, we have some map layers that you can turn on and off to explore some other data. So we have the state DAC definitions defined at the census tract. This might be handy to have for cases where there might be like a lead service line replacement project, where many states will use their criteria for the project area instead of the entire water system. So this might show you where areas might qualify as a DAC for project-based for when the area is looked at in terms of the project scope versus the entire water service area. We have violations from the EPA ECHO database. And we have the climate and economic justice screening tool. Now, this tool was taken down, but this was part of the Justice 40 program under the Biden administration, and we have this available here, so you can see how disadvantaged communities compare to this DACs compared to these CGIST disadvantaged communities. Now I want to go back up to the DAC analysis and expand that. I am going to click on a water service system, Harvey, Illinois. It's not a DAC, it's in gray. And under the DAC analysis, you'll see that it replicates the definition, but also provides some additional information and fields where you can change those thresholds. So I just want to show you that the population of Harvey is right at the threshold. So increasing the population threshold by 1 qualifies Harvey as a DAC. So and also the population data that we use by default is the population reported by the community water system, the public water system. But the population that we find from the American Community Survey for Harvey is not the same as that. So and it's less. So it's, in fact, it's nearly 5,000 people fewer than what the public water system reports. So there's a possibility that Harvey in their application would just report what they know to be their population and not and not what the public water system report is, although, yeah. And then you can change other criteria. And as you change things, the map changes. The, 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 the donut chart at the top will change as well. And we have some little indicators, either a red check or a red X or a green check to indicate if this criteria is met by the selected service area. So I'm going to reset the criteria, and now I will show you some other states. So at the top, in the header navigation, there is a drop down that lists the states available here. So let's see, I'll go to Michigan. And, you know, I had a timer I was going to run, but I forgot to click start. So someone lets me know when I'm getting too close to the end of my time. I appreciate it. So for Michigan, the DAC definition is that median household income must be less than the state median household income, and that's 68,505. And the taxable value per capita must be less than 23,778. So this second criteria is unique to Michigan. This is a state value. So we can't, we couldn't use this in other states. But there's also another possibility. The first criteria, the median household income, must be met, and either the taxable value per capita must be less than 23,778, or the average water rate increase warranted by the proposed project exceeds 1% of the median household income. So this criteria requires some information that we don't have, that is about the project and the cost and that will be incurred to the end users. So we note these caveats here below the DAC definition. So just wanted to point that out, and I'll show you Ohio has a similar caveat listed. In Ohio, population must be less than 10,000, and at least 3 of the following criteria must be met. Median household income less than state median household income, 200% poverty rate and greater than the state poverty rate. Unemployment rate must be greater than the state unemployment rate, or the average water rate is greater than 1.44% of median household income. And the caveat here is the Ohio DAC definition also requires community water system service areas to provide documented health indicators. So these are data that we don't have. So now I'll switch to Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a very different definition, they have a much more complicated system where they award points for water service areas that are at different are within different ranges. So population range of 10,000 or more, 8,500 to 1,000, 10,000, etc. So population, median household income as percent of state median income, etc. And some of these are unique data to Wisconsin. For example, population loss over 20 years. This comes from Wisconsin's population projection data. So for the DAC analysis of Wisconsin, we allow users to adjust these low-end threshold points for each of the tables here. I'm not going to do that right now, but I will show you that one of the features of the tool is that you can, while looking at one state, you can apply the DAC definition of another state to the state you're looking at. So I'm going to choose the New York DAC definition and apply it to Wisconsin. So we can view the donut chart here and see that under New York's definition, 26% of the service areas qualify as DACs. I'll toggle back to Wisconsin because I don't remember what it was. Yeah, 91% qualify under Wisconsin's DAC definition. As Janet, I don't remember if she mentioned, but it's certainly in the report. You know, the Wisconsin definition awards points, and the more points you get, the greater amount of assistance you may receive. So anyway, so there's the New York definition again. Here is you'll see it below. Another feature, I guess I won't go into the details of this, but another feature is a custom DAC definition that you can apply to any state. And there's some limitations here. We have the ability to select one to three criteria and apply those to the state you're looking at. So so I will start with median household income must be less than, and then I have to enter a value. The Wisconsin median household income is $72,458. So I'm going to do that, 72. And you'll see here that 393 of the water service areas qualify with that criteria set. I'm going to add in the poverty rate. Must be greater than, I'm going to use the state poverty rate of 10.7%. 246 areas qualify under that. Now, these may not be the same. So if we scroll to the top, then we can see that 223 qualify for both of those criteria. And then I'm going to add another one, unemployment rate. I'll use the state definition or the state average again. Yeah, so each time you change these values or you know, add the criteria, the map changes and the charts change as well, including the demographics, by the way. These portions of the bar chart will change as well. I am realizing that I skipped over one key part, and so I will just go ahead and pick a water service area in Wisconsin to show you that we have the details for each water system available here. So once you select one, you'll see the name of it in the upper right of the map, and with a link to show the details. So in the top, you'll see just information about the water system with a link to the EPA ECHO database to see a report on violations and enforcements taken against or against the water service area. And then below that, we have the same demographic data just for the water service area. So age, vehicle access, etc. So so that's that. And then the last thing I just wanted to point out was the header navigation. We've been on this overview and analysis this entire time, but there's also a resources tab with some links here, and the about page, where we talk about the tool and the project, and here are the advisory groups that were represented on the committee, organizations that were on the advisory committee, and of course our funders. And in the footer, we have some links as well: an introduction, an FAQ, a user guide, the glossary of terms, and data and methods. And on the data and methods page, you'll see a data dictionary. If you'd like to download the data that you're looking at, there's always this download Wisconsin data or whatever state you're looking at. And you'll get all of these fields in the data download, including the very last one is if you've made any modifications to the state DAC definition, you'll get a yes or no or a true or false value based on what changes you've made. So if you've applied another state definition or modified the state definition or built a custom definition, you'll get the true or false value for all the water systems in the state, whether or not they meet the criteria, as well as the DAC, the state DAC definition value, whether that's true or false based on the state definition. So yeah, that's it for my demo. So I will turn it back over to Nina.
All right. Actually, we're going to go over to Janet, who's going to talk about how to use actually use the tool, and then we'll get into the panel.
Thanks, Nina. Just get to my next slide. Oop. Right. So just wanted to come back and lift up some of the ways that you might want to use the learning that you can derive from the tool. Firstly, we encourage, if you're interested in these issues, to not just look at the tool, but also look at your state's SRF policies. You can find those policies in the intended use plan for each of the states that are covered, which will provide more complete details about the DAC definitions and contextualize them within the wider policy framework for that state. You can also sign up to be notified by your state and get an alert whenever a new IUP comes out. States will typically issue an IUP on an annual basis for each funding cycle, where they're distributing their SRF assistance each year. But each state will have its own timetable and may come out with their IUPs on a different timetable cycle for their state. You can also reach out to your local water system to learn if your water system has applied for SRFs, is interested in applying, if they've encountered any challenges, what SRF funds they've received in the past, if they haven't applied or considered applying, why is that? And work with your local water system around their interests and engagement and needs in relation to SRF funds. You can also connect with others, in your state who share these interests and concerns to then reach out to your drinking water SRF agency in your state to learn more from, the folks in your state who run the program, to build your own understanding of your state program, and also raise your concerns and recommendations of what you'd like to see, any changes you'd like to see, priorities you'd like the state agency to keep in mind when they're crafting their state policies. And there's also an opportunity in each funding cycle then to more formally note your priorities and your concerns through written comments on draft IUPs that come out each year for your state. And if you're interested in becoming more involved in these issues and doing advocacy at the state level around SRF state policies, I want to draw your attention to this SRF State Advocates Forum, which is a network that's co-convened by EPIC together with the Alliance for the Great Lakes, the River Network, and PolicyLink. It's a network that convenes periodic meetings with folks interested in these issues, and also provides a lot of additional resources around these issues through the SRF State Advocates Forum website, which Valerie's just put into the chat. So moving on to the panelists.
Yes, I want to take a second and pause because I know we just went through this, showing the tool, showing some examples, and there's some folks in the chat specifically from Michigan, both Kelly and Mark, and I want to thank you so much for your comments and uplifting corrections that you're seeing, and we're happy to talk to you and talk to you about if there are data that's inaccurate or data that we could be updating. We're totally open to that. One of the things that both CNT and EPIC are very grounded in is the fact that these tools are meant to be helping, again, communities and practitioners, right? We also understand that we can't have everybody at the table all at the same time, and we make errors as well. And one thing about being a public servant for the last 10 years before I joined CNT, I understand how hard it is to make sure that the information that's being presented is accurate, or that the information won't cause you more harm or more damage to a program that you're running. And I want to make sure that you understand that we're coming into this process earnestly trying to make sure, again, that the redistribution of resources in order to make sure that communities who need it most are actually getting the resources that they need. I'm actually a native Detroiter, born and raised on the east side of Detroit, and I can tell you, growing up, there are needs of structural inequities in the cities that we live in all throughout the state, whether it be Michigan or Illinois or Wisconsin. And we're all here at the table, and I'm assuming that everybody's on this call because we want to be able to do the work and we want to be able to have better outcomes. And so I appreciate your time. I appreciate you all coming out. And that goes for as we release this tool and as people interact with it, we will get more data about how its usability, making sure that it's something that, our practitioners and our partners, both in government and on the private side, can actually use and feel like it's valid, it's accurate, and something that they can be proud to share. So just wanted to state that, also name that, and say that we are ready and willing to move forward and make corrections as we do. And as CNT has been making tools for over 4 decades now, we're constantly evolving and changing our tools to meet the needs of the people we made them for. So just wanted to name that and say thank you again. So we're going to go ahead and get into the panelists. So we have Becky Hammer from who's a senior attorney at the Freshwater Ecosystems at the Natural Resources Defense Council. And then we also have Joe Fitzgerald, who's the Policy and Advocacy Director at Milwaukee Water Commons. So thank you so much both for coming here and also participating in this project that we've been doing for over a year. So would love to talk to you both about some your experiences, one that of the work that you've done over the last year, and also how your organizations are going to be using this tool and hope that other people can use it too. So, one housekeeping note is that if you do want to ask questions, you can put it in the Q&A forum. We likely won't answer it in there. We're consolidating the questions, and I'll be reading off of a consolidated page. So just in case, don't be alarmed. We are looking at all of your questions, but if we don't answer it directly, just know that we're consolidating the questions to make sure that we don't overstate or regurgitate information that has already been shared. So, welcome, Joe and Becky. My first question to you both is, what's your organization kind of current scope of work with SRFs, and how do you interact with it right now?
I guess I'll go first. Hey, everybody. It's great to be here. Great to be included in this. So I work for the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is a national nonprofit environmental advocacy organization. I'm based in DC. So I am an attorney on our freshwater ecosystems team, and I lead our advocacy around wastewater and stormwater infrastructure. And so my work on the State Revolving Fund program is focused on national policy for the most part, using, how to use federal legislation, rules, policies to make the SRF program work better and have more resources. And, our main goals for the SRFs are, in addition to increasing resources for the program, we want to direct funding to beneficial projects that increase resilience, and also relevant to this tool, increasing equity within the distribution of the funding.
Awesome. And Joe?
Hey, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Sorry, technology every day.
It's okay.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll echo Becky. It's really great to be here for this conversation here today. Again, I work with Milwaukee Water Commons as the Director of Policy and Advocacy, and our organization is a environmental nonprofit organization based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And, really at the outset of our engagement with the State Revolving Fund program, our interest was in addressing drinking water issues in our city and stormwater and wastewater challenges that exist in our city around flooding and aging infrastructure. And the State Revolving Fund was presented as an opportunity to help make sure that our city had the funding that it needed to address those problems. Our organization works through 4 different frameworks. We focus on community engagement, collective impact, the commons, and environmental justice. And our focus really was on ensuring that folks, communities who are experiencing environmental hazards, whether that is not being able to trust the water that they're drinking, or dealing with these issues of aging infrastructure, have the resources that they need and are prioritized to be able to address those concerns in their communities. And as we became more engaged with that advocacy here locally, and also around our state, we've recognized that there are these kinds of concerns popping up all across communities all around the country. Our organization works at the local level in coordination with coalitions on addressing some of the issues specifically around lead in drinking water in Milwaukee and around flooding concerns. We also work at the state, regional, and even national level to advocate on these policies and programs, insisting about the necessity for these funds to support the needs of communities all across our state who we've seen utilizing the State Revolving Loan Fund. We've also worked quite a bit at the state level, both with our Department of Natural Resources, who facilitates our SRF program here in Wisconsin, as well as with other utilities and municipalities to identify how to best set up a state revolving fund program so that it ensures that those dollars are being utilized with the urgency of communities who are facing those challenges, and also that those funds are distributed equitably to ensure that we're using that limited resource to address the most urgent needs with that priority. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how our organization has worked on the state revolving fund program.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, just goes to show just how much time and effort obviously goes into thinking about infrastructure, water infrastructure, and the organizations that are fighting to make sure that communities that need infrastructure improvements the most are getting the resources. So thank you for sharing that. Next, I'd love to talk about what are some of the potential applications of the of this tool for the work that you're doing and making sure that resources are not just allocated, but they're actually, you know, turning into projects, meaningful changes in communities every day.
Um, so the work that NRDC is doing to try to improve equity within the SRF program, a big part of that is, making sure that state policies are directing critical funding, especially, additional subsidy to the communities that need it the most. So states' definitions of disadvantaged communities are a huge part of that work. Even though we're not looking at individual states, we're looking at how these issues can be addressed through national policy. Um, we need to know what's happening in particular states. But I'm coming at this issue, from a federal perspective. So I will not necessarily be using the tool, unlike maybe Joe or a lot of other groups I expect, will be, using the tool to look at, your own state's definition and how that could be improved, or maybe trying to identify whether like a particular community would qualify as a disadvantaged community. I'm taking like more of a wider, high level view, and trying to evaluate, the differences between state definitions. And so like for me, what's useful about this tool in my work is providing that picture of how widely varying the state's definitions are from each other, and how, different the results of those differences can be, such that, similarly situated communities on different sides of state lines might not have the same access to additional subsidy, which has, I think, national policy implications. Um, of course, there are certain like legitimate reasons why one state would define disadvantaged community differently from how another state would do it. And that's fine. What we're on the lookout for is policies that produce kind of like arbitrary or incoherent results that don't make sense, even when you take account, geographic or demographic differences between states. So the tool gives us some empirical evidence, or, a big picture look, that helps with our federal advocacy that's aimed at establishing minimum baselines that might be appropriate to ensure a degree of fairness within the program, no matter where a community is located. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And then I guess one other thing I'll mention before I turn it over to Joe is that as I primarily work on the wastewater and stormwater side. So the clean water SRF is where I spend a lot of my time. And a lot of people don't realize that states use often different definitions of a disadvantaged community for their drinking water program compared to their clean water program. Not all, but many do use different definitions. So this tool is looking only at the drinking water side. But nonetheless, I think it'll be really useful for my work because it just underscores this essential point about, variability between states and how we might need some baseline minimum approaches to ensure equity.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing from you as somebody who's, again, worked in government, worked for the city of Los Angeles for 5 years, worked for the city of Chicago before coming to CNT, I understand what you mean about having the value of being able to say, yes, we are unique, but what are the best practices, or how do we keep ourselves accountable, right? It's always good to get a kind of a cross section of what's going on in different places. When I was in LA, I was calling people in Boston saying like, what are you guys doing? We have two different contexts, but what's the best practice, right? If we're really trying to hold ourselves accountable, accountability means that we have to constantly evaluate and see what's happening around us to make sure that if we say we have a value, right, and that value being equity or diversity or getting, economic mobility, whatever those things are, that we actually test that theory and then course correct. And this tool is one way to help do that. So thank you for kind of sharing that perspective. Joe, is there anything that you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that answer. I guess there are a few specific things for this tool that I think really make it a valuable tool for having impact on what's going on with our drinking water systems. One is around just visibility. Um, I shared at the outset of our organization's work with the State Revolving Fund program. We live in a city with over 65,000 lead service lines, and our urgency of working on this in this program area was that we want to see that issue addressed for communities who are living with the hazards of lead in their water. And there are communities all around the state that are dealing with drinking water challenges of different types or have their own challenges that they're looking to address. But navigating the state revolving fund programs, disadvantaged communities, terminology, like even that that just broke down 2 acronyms, can be its own hurdle for folks who are, at the end of the day, what we want to do is see these funds have an impact on drinking water challenges and make sure that folks have access to safe and affordable water. And so what I think that this tool does is it visualizes a conversation that otherwise has really only existed in these intended use plan documents or through these meeting spaces that oftentimes a lot of people don't have access to. So I think one real value of this tool is that it will be able to connect people to the conversation about the state revolving fund program, and especially because of the connections to those demographic data that we were showing earlier, it really helps folks visualize how these policies can have impact, what impact they're having currently, how we could adjust those policies to ensure that truly that we're having the greatest impact on folks who are dealing with those water infrastructure challenges, that we're really investing in supporting disadvantaged communities who otherwise can't finance the actions needed to be able to address water problems in their own cities. And I guess that's kind of the second opportunity to have this impact is we really can see now what are the disadvantaged communities when we in Wisconsin, living in Wisconsin, and you all saw the rundown of the tables and the point system, and it's really helpful to be able to visualize actually how those tables and kind of prioritization factors actually land in terms of mapping those things across our state and how those impact communities within our municipalities. And so I think that we'll be able to have some real honest conversations around what is the most equitable way, the most effective way to have an impact on folks who are dealing with drinking water challenges. And to be able to do that by comparing the practices of different states, I think we do a lot of coalition work with our organization. I sit at the table a lot with municipal leaders and state administrators, but also community-based organizations to try to figure out how to navigate this problem. And sometimes there's a tension there, a history that can make those conversations difficult, but being able to really have this information out on the table in front of us to be able to say, well, this is what another state has been doing. This is how it's worked for them. And then to be able to talk about what's the best path forward. I think it will be a real asset for having all the folks who are interested in addressing these water challenges be able to come to the same table and figure out the best way to move forward.
I definitely understand that personally because, like I said, I'm from the east side of Detroit. My mother's basement floods, every year whenever there's a heavy rain. We get, letters in the mail about, oh, you may be, your pipes may be, you might be exposed to lead. And a lot of folks, including my friends and family, don't know what to do with that information. They don't even know, as you stated, which gets us to our next kind of line of questioning about what are specific, helpful features of the tool. Sometimes just being able to go to a place and understand what is a DAC and why is it important and how does it affect me, right? Because people understand that they're being affected when their basements flood or they can't drink their water without boiling it or insert, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't understand, what is the language that the practitioners and the policymakers are using to really change those things. And now that they have the language, and now that they have a tool, they're more inept and prepared to have those conversations, to push on their legislators, to push on, the folks working in in these different departments, and say, hey, we want to make sure that you're, allocating funds in the places that need it most. So I think that lesson is definitely very valuable, and I'm so glad that you uplifted that. Is there any last comments before we open it up to our full panel, Becky and Joe, just about some of the other maybe specific features of the tool that you want to uplift and want people to play around with?
For me, I think, some of the features I'll definitely be using are comparing the number of communities, roughly that qualify as DACs, from one state to another, so we can see how widely that varies. I think being able to apply one state's definition to another state to see how the results would change is really going to be an awesome feature that I will be using a lot, sharing the results of. And then I guess I would also mention just being able to understand the impacts of certain policy choices that we've been focusing on. For example, we've been trying to understand the impact of states applying a strict population cap to their DAC definition, and which types of communities that excludes. So when we can look at it through the mapping tool, we can see, roughly, how many or what proportion of communities are not eligible because of that feature of the definition, as well as the policy choice to, what geographic scale at which to apply the definition. Is it just the project area, or is it the community as a whole? And the fact that the mapping tool allows you to look at specific census tracts, I think is really helpful, because it'll allow us to see, how many areas are being excluded that might qualify if, a narrower geographic scale is used, when the state is only looking at, the community as a whole. So those are some features I'll definitely be using.
Joe?
Yeah, I think there are two things maybe I'd want to shout out, and one is that I'm really excited for this tool for especially municipalities and utilities to be able to utilize this tool alongside advocates, nonprofits and advocates. I hope that utilities and municipalities will also become advocates for their SRF policies, but that folks will be able to really take a look at how the ranking formulas in each state affect the distribution of these funds. And I think that it's not necessarily always felt open for folks to be able to change the way that this program works. And I hope that this will be an opportunity for folks to take a look at how the policies drive the impact of those funds and how they're distributed, and take this as an opportunity to work together with advocates to adjust some things and drive some policy changes in each state to really see the greatest impact. And then on that point too, I think it's important that we all sit with some of the demographic information that corresponds to this tool. As you change those policy levers, you can see how the SRF does or does not drive impact in terms of addressing challenges for communities that are really need this funding to address water infrastructure challenges in their communities. When we talk about the disadvantaged community definitions and look at how one policy affects folks who are living at 200% poverty level, or folks who don't have access to health insurance, having a lead service line in your community, if you don't have the money to replace it, or you don't have the insurance to deal with the health outcomes that are driven by those water infrastructure challenges, this is why this program exists, is to be able to try to equitably address these challenges across our country. When we see that there's disparities in access to this funding for low-income communities or for people of color, these are things we should take really seriously in how we assess these policies. And I just encourage that be really a driving part of the conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you for really lifting that up, because in a time in which it is going to be super important to make sure that we're taking care of our population's most vulnerable communities, which statistically means all sorts of things, but is overlapped with a lot of historical injustices. I think looking at those demographics is actually, yeah, a great example of saying like, hey, who are we missing? If we said we were going to look out for vulnerable communities of a certain type, are we actually meeting that promise? Are we actually living that value? And being humble enough to take in that information, sit with it, right? And then say, okay, now how am I going to move forward and make good on the value that my institution said that they had? And I think being able to absorb that information in a time in which, the polarization of our political system has made it a poo-poo to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, that can be co-opted, but at the end of the day, it's about making sure that society's most vulnerable populations are being taken care of. So thank you so much for uplifting that. I want to open it up and have Paul and Janet back. And I'm going to read off of some of the questions, but what I'd like to start with is just thinking about and also addressing the elephant in the room. What are some of the challenges of this tool? What are some of the challenges of trying to create a tool like this that is, encompassing enough to try to make change, but also understanding that we can't be everywhere and and know all the things. So I would love to talk about some of the challenges and maybe how we're acknowledging those challenges and then moving forward to make sure that we have a tool that is working for the intended audience.
Yeah, I'll respond to that, Nina. As we alluded to briefly in some of our introductory comments, but it's good to underscore now that you've had a chance to look at the tool and how it works, is that a key challenge has been that there are some components of some of the some DAC definitions that can't be mapped because it might depend on project dependent data or other data that's not publicly available to access and incorporate into a tool like this. And so that can result in a concern that you see a set of communities mapped for a certain state, but then because there might be one factor that we weren't able to map, what you see in the tool might underrepresent, right, all the communities that might be captured by that map. So it's important to read some of the fine print and keep that in consideration when you're using the tool. In just during this webinar, and as Nina said, we appreciate some of the folks from the Michigan SRF agency who have attended the webinar and have raised some concerns and questions that they want to raise about how they're seeing the Michigan DAC definitions mapped. Now, from what I've been able to pick up from some of the comments, there could be a couple of different concerns, but one could be in relation to how the geographic scope areas are defined, what are the geographic scope and boundaries used in Michigan to apply the different DAC factors. As I mentioned briefly at the top of my comments, we've utilized the service area boundaries as mapped in a tool developed by the EPA, mapping out the service area boundaries for each state, but there might be different nuances in different states about how different geographic regions are combined in terms of where the DAC factors should apply. Now, we need to re-examine Michigan on this question and some others that were raised in the chat. What I'd just like to alert, and we certainly want to learn more about what those concerns are and determine whether or not we can use this tool for Michigan. We initially started out in the project looking at all 8 Great Lakes states, and we made a judgment early on in the project that we couldn't map Pennsylvania's DAC definition, because in determining who qualifies as DACs in Pennsylvania, they utilized various components of information, and this is explained further in the accompanying report as to more about Pennsylvania's DAC definition and why we couldn't map it. But they utilized some data that it's not public data and even involves sort of different comparison across project specific data that comes in each year and different things like that made it really impossible to use a tool like this to map Pennsylvania's definition. maybe we can make some revisions and have a mapping that works for Michigan, or it may be that we'll find in our conversations with the Michigan folks that there are things that make it hard for us to map the Michigan DAC definition, for example. And so as we've announced with this webinar, the tool is due to go live tomorrow, but I think we probably will, well, I'm going to suggest to the team that we take Michigan off the tool when we release it tomorrow, because I think it's important that we resolve some of the concerns that have been raised by those agencies before we include it tomorrow with the tool.
Yeah.
But that kind of underscores some of the things that I really appreciate Joe raising as well, that the overarching goal of this tool is really to build understanding and dialogue across these important policies that determine how our public resources are being allocated across the states. And so in as much as the tool can actually help facilitate that understanding and that dialogue, is that then the tool is really doing its job, I think. And so we encourage those of you who are advocating in different states, you know, to use this tool when you're having that dialogue with those state staff people, because we hope that it can make the whole conversation around this particular area of policy, you know, more concrete. And to help build a better understanding of what the policies are and the impacts of those policies. Because sometimes just reading a policy on paper, it can be very difficult to understand, well, what does that really mean? How does it actually play out in the world? And we hope that this tool actually is another way to help, you know, to help facilitate that dialogue and understanding by making it more concrete, more real, and helping it, you know, in times to clarify where there could be misunderstandings too across what policies mean and how they apply.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for talking about the challenges and some of the things that we did to address the challenges previously. But I think what even in Janet's, you know, in our side conversations of like, hey, yeah, let's take back let's hold off on doing the Michigan, you know, mapping portion of this until we figure it out, shows that we're here and willing to be accountable and also wanting to push the work forward. And so I think this is a good example of kind of how we operate, value-based. You know, the organizations that have come together, our values are to you know, undo harm and try not to cause more harm. And so we're here to do that. And I also think these challenges are also a symptom of, as somebody who worked in government, the lack of or the ability to be transparent with data or data accessibility, right? I'd rather it be that our organizations misinterpreted, you know, something on a website than it be the public, right? And did the public even find the website? Could they even interpret, you know, kind of the jargon that is public policy? I've written ordinances for millions of people between 2 major cities in this nation, and I'm telling you, it's jargon, right? There's a reason that we use a certain type of language or cadence, because it is mysterious on purpose. It is to leave people out of the system. And so even if a whole bunch of water advocates and professionals got together and misinterpreted data or information, publicly accessible information, that means there's a larger problem with maybe the accessibility of data across states. There's an issue with some data not being publicly accessible or able to do that, right? And there's all sorts of movements around data trust, being able to make sure that the community actually feels like they have access to data that cities are holding on to, and being more transparent about cities and states and the federal government, which we know has been a big issue with data being taken off at great lengths at the federal level. We need to come together even more in order to make sure that we're protecting and advocating for data transparency and accessibility. And that's something that all of the advocates on this call are willing to do. So yes, very excited about, you know, getting in the knee deep in some of the challenges that we're seeing and seeing how we can move forward. So the next question is from Samantha. So how are states that are using EHD or CVI to fuel their DAC definitions and mapping adapting to policy changes that affect those statistics? If there are any that have already made changes, how have their maps or definitions changed?
Yeah, I think if I understand the question, what the question is pointing to is, you know, a DAC definition or any other government policy might rely on a certain source of data. And I think the questionnaire is raising concerns about with shifting levels of attention or resources or biases that could be applied to different sources of data and how it's gathered, then of course that also has further carry-on impacts for the outcomes of policies that rely on this data. And that's where I think a tool like this that attempts to like take the data and then map it so you can kind of see, if you apply this data, what communities are captured, right? And then it's a good way to kind of vet and test is the data that's being relied on sort of capturing the communities that we think are important based on other lived experience and other kinds of expectations that we might have. And so that may, in some cases, and I think the questioner suggests, sometimes raise concerns about the data sources themselves. And this, again, I think is an appropriate sort of subject then to raise in dialogue with state policymakers around their choices around which data sets you know, we rely on, as well as just be a kind of another case study to kind of lift up issues around the quality of data and data collection itself.
Anybody else want to chime in on that? All right. And so let's move on. And so sorry, Sam, I see your note in that when I'm dyslexic, so sometimes when I read fast, I get letters mixed up. So thank you for the correction. I'm sorry that I messed up that acronym. All right, so we have another question. I wonder which years of DAC definitions are used in the map tool. Thanks. So what years are we spanning here?
So the report and the tool relies on the DAC definitions from the state fiscal year 2025. So a lot of states are starting now over the spring and summer to release their IUPs for the state fiscal year 2026. So most states will update their data each year. And then, you know, we will try to update, you know, the tool to keep it accurate as well in terms of reflecting, you know, what's the current data. But what we built as our template here when we were constructing the tool was based on state fiscal year IUPs, the data that's relied on there. Paul, you might have other comments around data sources you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, that's correct. We started with fiscal year 2024, and as we moved through the project, we were fortunate that the definitions didn't change substantially so that we could shift to 2025, but hopefully we can keep it updated. Yeah.
Keep the updated. Yeah. I mean, as you know, CNT and Epic, you know, make tools, and we always want to make sure that we're keeping our data updated and refreshed. So I know we only have 7 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get to at least 2 more really substantive questions. Can you download a table of all the community water systems that meet the DAC definition or other items that you're selecting through this tool?
Yes, all of the data that's displayed on the tool, including demographics, water system ID and name, violations, that's all downloadable by state. So yeah, there's always the download button in the upper right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's going to be a flat file, and then you in the data and methods page, you can link to the EPA website that where you can get the spatial data. So if you need it in a GIS, then you can join those two data sets in GIS.
Okay. All right. So yes, publicly accessible. You can download it, and then you could use it at your will. Could you speak to the water utility specific demographic data? Is this from the census? Also, where do you get information for the water utility bills that some states use?
Yeah. So the water rate data, this would have been my answer to the first question. it's
A challenge.
yeah, it's one of the more challenging data points, and I think
Mhm.
3 of the states use the water rate data, and this is available at the PUMA, which are large areas within a state. So we, you know, averaged. Uh, um, Proportionally averaged the average water rate from the Pumas to the water service areas. So so it may not be accurate for every water system, but you know, the water rate itself is not an adjustable value, but if you adjust the percentage, you know, you could maybe get a better idea if you suspect that water rate is not accurate for the water service area. The demographic data was crosswalked, and Epic has a great methodology for this that we used. So there's a link to to the to the methods for that on the data and methods page. But they crosswalk the data from the American Community Survey 5-year averages ending in 2022 to the water service bounds.
And one last question. Well, that's kind of putting two questions together. Are there plans to add more states to this tool? And a corresponding question is, it's more of a statement. It would be interesting to add the actual SRF funding received from these DACs, by the DACs. Is that something that we may want to do in a future iteration? So those two questions.
Yeah, I'll try to speak to those. I think as whether or not there's plans to add additional states, not currently. This was a pilot project, and I think it would be important to have a period to sort of assess the utilization of the project and have a further assessment of it before it were decided if it should be expanded to additional states and seek funding and resources to do that. So at the moment, it stands with just this set of Great Lakes states and no current plans to expand it. And then to the question around, it would be interesting to see, what awards actually go to which DACs. As the report that accompanies the tool explains, it's important to remember that just because a community appears as a DAC on this map, it doesn't mean that it's going to get SRF assistance. It may not apply for assistance. There are other policies in addition to the DAC definition that determine who gets assistance. So this is just one piece that determines who gets assistance. It's also a challenge. We're talking about challenges with data and accessibility of data. It actually is challenging to also discern and have publicly accessible data around where the SRF funds end up going and especially where they don't go in terms of sort of various communities that might have applied for SRF funds but fall out of the project pipeline for one reason or another. This is another area that Epic is working on through other projects. There is the EPA SRF funding portal that provides some data on sort of communities that have received SRF assistance. This usually comes out about 2 years after the decision making around who gets assistance has been made. So there's both some delays in publishing data and then sometimes some challenges in connecting those data points to other policies or steps in the process going back to what led to those outcomes. So it just points to sort of multiple sort of challenges around the data and transparency in this space that certainly CNT and Epic, I think, are two organizations, among others, that are very much trying to work on making this data more discernible and more available. But there's still a lot of challenges in this space and work we need to do there.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much for those of you who decided to come today and learn about this tool. Some of the things we want to note is that all the questions, comments, issues explored today, we will be going back to the lab and kind of collaborating and reaching out to folks who have been in the chat and want to talk. Please do reach out to us. Please check out EPIC's other resources on DAC definitions and the other SRF policies. If you're interested, get involved in the SRF State Advocacy Forum, which is great. And let us know if you find, the DAP mapping tool or other resources helpful or not, right? We want to hear all of it because that's really what again, what makes us be able to really do the change that we need to do, ego aside, for all parties involved. How do we make sure we're putting information in the hands of community and practitioners so that they can advocate for what's best? I really, again, appreciate all of your time. Again, also really want to hone in on the Joyce Foundation, Kresge, and the Water Foundations for supporting this work. There's no way for us to do this work or to be in these rooms without funding, without the investments of folks who know how important it is for this work to be done, and for, organizations like all of ours involved in this project to be advocating for change. And so just really want to nail that in and say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.